Welcome back to the Mass Torque System series. In episode 1, I introduced the basic idea behind the mechanism and showed a simple demonstration. Now let's move on to figure 1, which covers the basic talking motion. This motion is the foundation for everything that comes next. Like any second-class lever, the longer the lever arm is, the less force you need to apply. The geometry of the system is such that as you pull the lever down, the weight of the half dome base and the fact that it is round and able to rock begins to use gravity to assist in cocking the engine. Once the lever is almost horizontal with the ground, it reaches what I call the overfall position. This is the moment where it transitions from needing you to pull it down to a position where gravity will take over and pull it the rest of the way to the ground. That exact location is the balance point, the moment the lever is neither rising nor falling. At this point, you can stop the engine from moving any further, and when you're ready to start the next cycle, it takes little to no energy to re-engage the engine. As with any lever, the length of the lever arm determines how much force is required to pull a load attached to the engine, similar to how a come-along works. In this case, the relevant math may be simply the standard level formula, which is effort force times effort arm equals load force times load arm. Unlike a traditional lever, however, the mass torque engine stores gravitational energy when it is in its cocked position. Once released, that stored energy produces a burst of useful power that can be harnessed. This gives the engine both a controlled pulling phase and a single powerful release phase. In addition, the mass torque system uses gravity and geometry to assist during the initial cocking motion itself, something a normal second-class lever does not do. This combination of stored gravitational energy and geometry-assisted cocking makes the mass torque engine behave differently than a typical second-class lever. I'm also currently active in several forums where we are working together to put all this into proper mathematical terms. We're not fully there yet, so for now I'll continue focusing on experiments and demonstrations. If you have suggestions, mathematical or otherwise, please reach out. A list of forums discussing the project is included in the description below. There have been a lot of questions about how to move the engine around, so I'll briefly cover several methods here before going into more detail in later episodes. When the mass torque engine is standing upright, you can cock the lever arm in any direction you choose. You can pull a load while cocking it, cock it first and then apply a load, or do both at the same time. Once the engine is in its cocked position, it can be rotated to any orientation with only a small amount of weight or force. In this demonstration, a very small weight hanging from a crane is enough to turn the engine to a new position. You can also use the engine as a wheel when it is in either the cocked or overfall positions, as shown here with the small weight. Although this method works well for short moves, larger moves are easier with a simple modification. By removing the lever arm from one engine and inserting the tip of a bent over second engine into the empty lever socket, you create a two-wheeled axle that can be transported easily. You can also couple the tips of two bent over horizontal lever arms attached to two separate engines to form a flexible axle that adapts to uneven terrain. The mass torque axle can then be towed to a new location by a third engine, even one positioned hundreds of feet away. Many people have pointed out the similarity of the mass torque engine and other things, such as the socket wrench, the come-along, blow-up punching bags, floating buoys, the pry bar, and the one I think it most resembles, the trebuchet. Although these are both very similar in that they use leverage, rotation around a pivot, shifting weight, and gravity-driven motion. The differences are the mass torque engine is designed for controlled, repeatable cycles and low effort caulking, while the trebuchet is designed for a single, explosive release of energy and requires heavy counterweights and large reset forces. The main difference is that the mass torque is built for building and helping, whereas the trebuchet is built for war. In the last episode, some people were frustrated that I didn't show enough math, correct physics, or proper terminology to describe what was happening in the demonstration where a 0.2 ounce weight cocked an engine and then pulled a 10.5 ounce sled. What I was trying to show in the simplest possible terms is that if a single person wanted to operate this tool, all they would need to do is climb to the top or pull the lever tip down using their own body weight. That alone gives them a precise, steady, dependable, and adaptable engine, one that can deliver heavy torque when needed, while also powering a variety of low torque devices. A person could use this technology effectively even if they don't fully understand the math or physics behind what's happening. They would simply know that it helps them do work that would otherwise be much harder. In this next demonstration, I'll push things even further. But before that, I want to talk about the kinds of low energy tools that could run off the engine while moving heavy loads that require high torque. For example, this saw I built uses very little power, yet if required 2 men to operate by hand, that would be a significant amount of labor. And if the engine were scaled up to 10 feet wide, the saw blade would travel a total of 50 feet in each direction with every cycle of the engine. A level of motion and consistency that simply wouldn't be possible if it were powered by human effort alone. Other low energy devices that could run continuously from a small, steady power source include reciprocating rasps and files, bellows, drum polishers, rope twisters, potter's wheels, primitive lathes, stamping hammers, simple pumps, drills, ventilation fans, and stone polishers or grinders. These are tasks that benefit from slow, consistent motion rather than brute force. In addition to running both high and low torque functions at the same time, the engine can also harvest energy directly from the movement of its own massive weight by operating over grain or rocks to crush them. In one experiment, I tried pulling a weighted sled while the engine was sitting directly on rice. It couldn't pull the sled at all because the rice acted like ball bearings, preventing the engine from gripping the ground. The same engine and sled work perfectly on normal ground. That led me to conclude that a hard, flat barrier is needed between the engine and the material being crushed, and that barrier must be secured so it doesn't slide. The sliding can actually be useful if you want to move the engine aside to expose the crushed grain. Seeing that the engine could do no work while sitting on rice showed me that it's not just the weight and geometry of the engine that matter. The engine needs good contact with the ground, similar to the rubber on a tire. As you can see here with the rubber-coated engine I originally made for water demonstrations, traction makes a huge difference. In later episodes, I'll coat some standard clay engines with rubber and compare their performance to uncoated versions. So now that I've explained the low and high torque applications, along with the crushing applications that can all run at the same time, I'd like to show you another demonstration that I hope helps explain the system even better. This 0.37 ounce weight is not enough to pull this weighted sled on rollers by itself. But when you place the mass torque engine in between them, suddenly that same tiny weight is able to pull the heavy load 9 inches. Once the engine is cocked, it's ready for its single powerful release phase, and it can pull the same weighted sled another 5 inches. Combine that with pulling a saw blade for 2 full cycles and also powering other low torque devices and crushing grain beneath it, and you start to see how much work is being done at once. There's even a small pulley in the system that can harvest additional energy. And remember, the original 0.37 ounce weight only traveled 10 inches downward. After that, the operator simply walks back up a ramp or stairs and rides the downward elevator motion again. With several people using it, the engine could cycle even faster. If you set this engine up at a rock quarry, it wouldn't just help with flint knapping and cutting stones. You could operate it by transferring rocks down to a lower level, something that has to happen anyway, while giving those rocks a safe, controlled descent instead of sliding them down ramps or dropping them, which is dangerous and often breaks the stone. In this setup, the engine is helping you and giving you a free source of power for all your quarry needs. The system can also be run with water power, and in some cases could even be replaced by water-driven versions. But water requires perfect conditions, elevation, and damming, none of which are easy. Unlike water, the mass torque system can be operated anywhere, anytime, under any conditions. I've even seen photos of the moon where rocks are just sitting on the surface, meaning this system might even be operable in low gravity environments. It's also a very simple mechanism, and all the tools it drives are simple as well, making it a cheap, economical option. A well-built engine made from good materials could last hundreds or even thousands of years. How many modern engines can say that? But here's my favorite theory, a combination of everything above. People already need to travel from high to low ground to get water, supplies, or simply to move around. What if the ancients who used this system, or people in an alternate modern timeline, used it as a way for everyday travelers to take an easy elevator ride downward, which automatically cocks the system? You could ensure each load had the proper weight, adding a few rocks, water, or food if needed. And if no people needed to go down, you could simply send supplies. In this version, society itself powers the entire system just by going about daily life. No slaves, no workers, just normal movement doing useful work. Yes, and people would still have to climb up, but they'd have to climb up anyway. And anyone who's ever walked down a steep hill knows that going down, especially with a heavy load, is difficult too. You could also send down extra weight in the elevator, which would lift a lighter elevator car upward, creating an upward moving lift powered entirely by the heavier descending load. A simple counterweight trick. Imagine if this technology had been invented thousands of years ago and continuously improved. Every elevator would be a power source. Every escalator, every staircase, every descent path, all generating clean, cheap energy as a natural byproduct of daily life. I know a lot of people want to argue that no ancient civilization used a system like this, or I can't prove any of them did. But I'm not claiming proof. I'm suggesting that this is one possible way a form of raw power could have been generated using simple physics, geometry, and gravity. And honestly, it ties together why so many mysterious machining questions about ancient cultures keep surfacing with no clear answers. These include cutting, shaping, and polishing stone, perfectly straight cuts in hard materials, mirror smooth finishes, ultra flat surfaces, perfect right angles, complex interlocking joints, advanced drilling and boring, moving and lifting massive stones, and precision tooling, as well as non-stone working clues that suggest ancient mechanical knowledge, such as ceramics and mass production, textiles and weaving, water and hydraulic systems, transportation and load handling, agriculture and food processing, such as grain mills and irrigation, and a wide range of mechanical tools that seem to require more consistent power than simple hand labor can provide. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I really do love using my mind to think about these things. Please check the website for ways to participate in the forums or help support the project. And feel free to interact across the social media accounts, the discussion forums, and right here in the comments below. I want to thank everyone who has helped me. Your insights, questions, and challenges have pushed this project forward in ways I've never expected. Thank you for being part of this journey into a world where simple ideas can unlock big possibilities.